The snow fell like shattered glass against Fiona Carmichael's face as she stumbled through the Montana wilderness, her fingers already turning blue beneath the thin cotton gloves that did nothing against the January wind of 1883. She had trusted them completely when her stepfather said they were going to visit relatives in Helena. Her mother had packed a small bag for her, avoiding her eyes the entire time, and Fiona had thought nothing of it until the wagon stopped 15 miles outside of town, in the middle of nowhere, and her stepfather told her to get out. When she refused, confused and frightened, he had grabbed her arm with bruising force and thrown her into the snow. Her mother had turned her face away, tears streaming down her cheeks but saying nothing, doing nothing. The wagon disappeared into the white landscape within minutes, leaving Fiona alone with nothing but the clothes on her back and a devastating realization that the burden of feeding another mouth had become too heavy for her family to bear. That had been 3 hours ago, or maybe 4. Time lost meaning when every breath felt like inhaling knives, and every step forward might be the last. She was 19 years old and had never imagined her life would end like this, frozen and alone in the Montana Territory. The irony was not lost on her that she had survived the harsh autumn helping her family prepare for winter, chopping wood and preserving food, only to be cast out into the very season she had worked so hard to prepare for. Her legs gave out finally, and she collapsed into a snowdrift beside what looked like a frozen creek. The cold was almost warm now, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a bad sign. She closed her eyes, wondering if anyone would even find her body come spring, or if the wolves and ravens would take care of that problem before the thaw. The sound of hoofbeats was so faint at first that she thought she imagined it. Then they grew louder, accompanied by the jingle of bridle chains and the heavy breathing of a horse working hard through deep snow. Fiona tried to lift her head but could not manage it. A voice called out, rough and masculine, filled with alarm. "Jesus Christ, there is someone out here." Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, and then strong hands were turning her over. Through half-frozen lashes, Fiona saw a man's face, weathered and tanned despite the winter, with dark eyes that widened in shock. He was perhaps 25, with several days of stubble on his jaw and a wide-brimmed hat crusted with snow. "Can you hear me? Miss, can you hear me?" Fiona tried to speak, but her jaw would not cooperate. The man swore again and scooped her up as though she weighed nothing. She felt herself being lifted onto a horse, settled against a warm chest, and then they were moving. The man wrapped his heavy coat around both of them, and Fiona felt the blessed warmth of another human body for the first time in hours. "Stay with me now," he said, his voice rumbling through his chest against her ear. "My ranch is not far. You stay with me." She must have lost consciousness because the next thing she knew, she was being carried again, this time through a doorway into a room filled with the most beautiful warmth she had ever felt. The man laid her on a rug in front of a stone fireplace where flames danced and crackled. "Do not go to sleep yet," he ordered, kneeling beside her and beginning to remove her frozen gloves. "I need to warm you up slowly or it will do more harm than good. What is your name?" Fiona, she managed through chattering teeth. "Fiona Carmichael." "I am Clayton Quincy," he said, rubbing her hands gently between his larger, calloused palms. "You are safe now, Fiona. You are at my ranch. How did you end up out there?" "Where is your family?" The question brought tears to her eyes, hot against her frozen cheeks. Clayton's expression shifted from concern to something harder, angrier, as understanding dawned. "They left you out there," he said, and it was not a question. "In this cold they left you." Fiona nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Clayton was quiet for a long moment, continuing to warm her hands, then moved to her feet, removing her wet boots and stockings with clinical efficiency. If he noticed how threadbare and patched everything was, he said nothing. "Well," he said finally, his voice carrying a tone of absolute certainty, "you belong with me now. They gave up their right to you the moment they abandoned you to die." Fiona stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. Clayton met her gaze steadily, his dark eyes intense. "I mean it," he said. "I have a ranch that is doing well enough. I have this house, small as it is. I have food and warmth and a spare room. I live alone since my father passed last year, and I could use help around the place. You need somewhere to be. Seems to me like a fair arrangement." "You do not even know me," Fiona whispered. "I know you are young and you deserve better than freezing to death in the snow," Clayton replied. "The rest we can figure out as we go. Right now, let us focus on getting you properly warm and fed. Then you can rest." He stood and moved to the kitchen area, which was part of the same large main room. Fiona watched him build up the fire in the iron stove and begin pulling out ingredients. Her mind spun with the impossibility of her situation. Hours ago she had been abandoned to certain death, and now a stranger was offering her a home. It seemed too good to be true, and her experience with her stepfather had taught her to be wary of men who seemed helpful. But what choice did she have? Return to the family who had left her to die? Walk into Helena with no money, no connections, and no prospects? At least here in Clayton Quincy's warm ranch house, she had a chance. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you help me?" Clayton paused in his work, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. 5 years ago, my younger sister Sarah got lost in a storm. She was only 14. By the time we found her the next morning, it was too late. I swore to God that if I ever had the chance to save someone from that same fate, I would. Today, I got that chance." He turned back to face her, his expression solemn. "So you see, Fiona Carmichael, maybe I am not doing this entirely for you. Maybe I am doing it for Sarah too. But either way, the offer stands. You have a place here for as long as you need it or want it." Fiona felt fresh tears slide down her cheeks, but these were different from the ones before. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Clayton finished preparing what turned out to be a simple but hearty stew. He brought her a bowl with a thick slice of bread and sat nearby with his own portion while she ate. The food was the most delicious thing Fiona had ever tasted, though that probably had more to do with her near-death experience than Clayton's cooking skills. Still, it was good, and there was plenty of it. As the warmth of the fire and the food seeped into her bones, Fiona felt exhaustion creeping over her. Clayton noticed her eyes drooping and stood. "Come on," he said, offering his hand. "The spare room is just through here." He led her to a small room off the main area. It held a simple bed, a dresser, and a trunk. A window looked out over what Fiona assumed was the ranch yard, though right now it showed nothing but darkness and falling snow. "It is not much," Clayton said, looking almost embarrassed. "But the bed is good, and there are extra blankets in the trunk. I will leave you one of my shirts to sleep in. Yours is still damp." He retrieved a clean flannel shirt from his own room and handed it to her, then stepped back toward the door. "If you need anything in the night, I am right across the way. Do not hesitate." "Clayton," Fiona said, and he paused in the doorway. "Thank you. I know those words are not enough, but thank you." He nodded, a small smile touching his lips for the first time. "Get some rest, Fiona. Tomorrow we can figure out the details." Alone in the room, Fiona changed into Clayton's shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. She crawled beneath the heavy quilts and felt the softness of a real mattress for the first time in months. At her family's home, she had slept on a thin pallet in the attic, giving up her bed when her mother married and the new family moved in. She should have been afraid, alone in a strange man's house in the middle of nowhere. But somehow she was not. Perhaps it was the exhaustion, or perhaps it was the genuine kindness she had seen in Clayton's eyes. Either way, she fell asleep within minutes and did not wake until morning light filtered through the window. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her from bed. She found her dress hanging by the fire, dry now, and changed back into it, feeling self-conscious about wearing Clayton's shirt around him. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found him standing at the stove, cooking breakfast. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Fiona admitted. "But better, much better. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready." Fiona took a seat at the rough-hewn table and watched Clayton work. He moved with the easy confidence of a man used to taking care of himself. When he set a plate in front of her laden with eggs, bacon, and toast, her stomach rumbled audibly. "Eat up," he said with a slight grin. "We have a lot to discuss." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Clayton leaned back in his chair, cradling his coffee cup. "Here is what I am thinking," he said. "I need help with this ranch. My father built it up from nothing, and I have been managing alone since he passed, but it is a lot for one person. I need someone to help with cooking, mending, keeping the house, and come spring, the vegetable garden. In return, you get room and board, and I will pay you a small wage on top of that so you have your own money." "Does that sound fair?" "More than fair," Fiona said. "But Clayton, I should tell you I am not an experienced housekeeper. At home, I did mostly outdoor work. I can cook basic things and I know how to sew, but I am better with an axe than a needle." Clayton's eyebrows rose with interest. "Is that so? Well then, even better. There is always wood to split and fences to mend. I can teach you the rest as we go." "You would teach me?" Fiona asked, surprised. "Why not? I had to learn it all when my father got too sick to work. Nobody is born knowing how to run a ranch." He paused, studying her face. "Fiona, I want to make something clear. You are not a servant here. You are not indebted to me. You are a person who needs a place to stay, and I am offering that place. If you want to help with the work, I appreciate it and I will compensate you fairly. But you are free to leave whenever you want. You understand?" Fiona nodded slowly, feeling something tight in her chest loosen. "I understand, and I want to help. I want to earn my keep. Then we have an agreement." Clayton extended his hand across the table, and Fiona shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm that matched her own. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Fiona with its ease. Clayton was an early riser, up before dawn to tend to the horses and cattle that he kept in the barn and covered pens near the house. Fiona woke shortly after and started coffee and breakfast. They ate together, discussing the day's tasks, and then divided the work. True to his word, Clayton taught her everything she needed to know. He showed her how to milk the 2 cows, how to collect eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, how to judge the best cuts of meat when butchering, and how to make bread that did not turn out hard as a rock. In return, Fiona showed him a more efficient way to organize the barn and helped repair the chicken coop that had been damaged in the same storm that nearly killed her. What surprised Fiona most was how easy Clayton was to be around. He did not try to fill every silence with chatter, but when they did talk, he listened to what she said with genuine interest. He never once made her feel like a burden or an obligation. When she burned supper the 3rd night, he simply laughed and they made sandwiches instead. When she accidentally let one of the horses out, and they spent an hour catching it in the snow, he teased her gently, but without meanness. By the end of the 1st week, Fiona realized she was more comfortable in Clayton's home than she had ever been with her own family. The thought brought a pang of sadness mixed with anger. How could her own mother have allowed her to be abandoned like that? Had she really meant so little to them? Clayton found her crying one evening as she washed the supper dishes. He did not ask what was wrong, just quietly took the cloth from her hands and pulled her into an embrace. Fiona stiffened at first, unused to such casual affection, but then melted into it, sobbing against his chest while he held her and murmured that it was all right, that she was safe now. When she finally pulled away, embarrassed by her outburst, Clayton handed her his handkerchief and said, "You do not have to be strong all the time, Fiona. What they did to you was unforgivable. You are allowed to grieve that loss." "I just do not understand how she could do it," Fiona whispered. "My mother. She birthed me, raised me. How could she just let him throw me away?" Clayton shook his head. "I do not have an answer for that. Some people are weak. Some people make choices that the rest of us cannot fathom. But their weakness does not define your worth. You hear me?" Fiona nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Clayton, for everything. You do not need to keep thanking me," he said softly. "Just being here is enough." Winter deepened around them. The days grew shorter and colder, and the snow piled high around the ranch house. Clayton and Fiona fell into an easy partnership, working together to keep the animals fed and healthy, the house warm and themselves occupied during the long, dark evenings. They played cards by firelight, and Clayton taught Fiona chess, using a beautiful set his father had carved from wood. She beat him for the first time on a night in early February, and his delighted laughter warmed her more than the blazing fire. "You are a quick learner," he said, resetting the pieces. "My father would have liked you." "Tell me about him," Fiona said, settling more comfortably in her chair. Clayton's expression grew distant with memory. "He came west after the war, looking for a fresh start. Bought this land for almost nothing because nobody else wanted to work this hard at making it profitable. He built this house with his own hands, raised cattle and horses, and made a decent living. He was tough but fair, and he loved my mother and Sarah more than anything." "What happened to your mother?" Fiona asked gently. "Consumption when I was 17. Sarah was only 12. My father tried his best with her, but I think losing our mother broke something in him. He got sick about 2 years after we lost Sarah, just seemed to give up. The doctor said it was his heart, but I think it was grief more than anything." "I am sorry," Fiona said. "You have lost so much." Clayton met her eyes across the chessboard. "So have you." "Yes," Fiona agreed. "But I am starting to think maybe loss makes room for something new, something better." "I like that thought," Clayton said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Finally, Clayton cleared his throat and stood. "I should check on the animals one more time before bed. Make sure the barn is secure." Fiona watched him pull on his heavy coat and disappear into the night. She sat alone by the fire, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She was falling for him, she realized with a start. Somewhere between the cooking lessons and the evening chess games, between his patience and his kindness, she had begun to care for Clayton Quincy as more than just a benefactor or a friend. The realization terrified her. What if he did not feel the same? What if she misread his kindness for something deeper and ruined the safe haven she had found here? She could not bear the thought of losing this place, this peace, this feeling of finally belonging somewhere. But as winter wore on and February gave way to March, Fiona began to notice small things that gave her hope. The way Clayton's gaze lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. The way he always made sure she had the warmest blanket, the best piece of meat, the most comfortable chair. The way he found excuses to touch her hand, her shoulder, her back in passing. One evening, as they worked together to prepare supper, Clayton stood behind her to show her how to properly knead bread dough. His chest pressed against her back, his arms came around her to guide her hands, and Fiona felt her breath catch. They stayed like that a moment too long, both suddenly very still, before Clayton stepped back quickly. "You have got it now," he said, his voice rough. Fiona turned to look at him and found his eyes already on her, intense and searching. The air between them felt thick with unspoken words. "Clayton," she began, but he shook his head. "I should go check the fences," he said abruptly, and left the house. Fiona stood alone in the kitchen, her hands covered in flour, her heart hammering. She finished the bread in a daze and put it in the oven to bake, then cleaned up and sat down to wait for Clayton's return. He came back an hour later, stamping snow from his boots. His cheeks were red with cold and his eyes carefully avoided hers. "Bread smells good," he said. "Clayton, we need to talk." He finally looked at her and she saw something almost like fear in his expression. "Fiona, I know what you are going to say and I am sorry. I overstepped. It will not happen again." "What?" Fiona stood, confused. "No, that is not what I was going to say at all." "It is not." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I was going to say that I have feelings for you. That somewhere along the way, you became more to me than just someone who saved my life. That I think about you constantly and I desperately hope, that maybe you feel something similar." Clayton stared at her, his mouth slightly open in surprise. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious features into something bright and joyful. "You have feelings for me," he repeated, as if testing the words. "Yes," Fiona said, her cheeks burning. "I know I have no right to. I know I am just someone you took in out of pity, but I cannot help how I feel and I thought maybe if there was even a chance." She did not get to finish because Clayton crossed the room in 3 long strides and cupped her face in his hands, kissing her with a fervor that stole her breath. Fiona melted into him, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, kissing him back with all the pent-up longing she had been carrying for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clayton rested his forehead against hers. "Not pity," he said fiercely. "Never pity. Fiona, I have been half in love with you since you beat me at chess and laughed with such genuine joy. I have been fighting it because I did not want you to feel obligated to return my feelings. You have been through so much, and I wanted you to be free to make your own choices without feeling like you owed me anything." "I do not feel obligated," Fiona said, pulling back to look him in the eyes. "I feel grateful, yes, but this is not gratitude, Clayton. This is real." "I know," he said softly, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. "I can see it in your eyes, the same thing I feel." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. When the smell of baking bread reminded them of the world beyond their embrace, they reluctantly separated to rescue the loaves from the oven. Everything was different after that night, yet somehow nothing changed at all. They still worked together, still played chess in the evenings, still talked for hours by the fire. But now Clayton held her hand as they walked to the barn, and Fiona kissed his cheek when she handed him his morning coffee. They moved around each other with an intimacy that felt both new and ancient, as if they had been doing this for years instead of weeks. As March turned to April and the snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth and the first tentative shoots of spring growth, Clayton took Fiona on a walk around the property. He showed her where he planned to expand the cattle pens, where the vegetable garden would go, where his father had once thought about building a second barn. "I want you to know," he said as they stood on a small rise overlooking the ranch, "that I see a future here. Not just for the ranch, but for us. I know it has not been long, but Fiona, I am sure about you. About this. If you will have me, I would like to court you properly. And if you feel the same after more time has passed, I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." Fiona turned to him, tears in her eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I do not need more time to know how I feel, Clayton. Yes, I will marry you, whenever you think is right." Clayton laughed, picking her up and spinning her around. "Soon then, as soon as we can arrange it. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you mine in the eyes of God and the law." They rode into Helena the following week to speak with the preacher, and to get Fiona a proper dress for the wedding. The town was bustling with the energy of spring, miners and ranchers and shopkeepers all conducting their business in the muddy streets. Fiona clung to Clayton's arm, overwhelmed by the noise and crowds after months of isolation at the ranch. While Clayton spoke with the preacher, Fiona went with the preacher's wife to the general store to look at fabric. Mrs. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s who asked no prying questions about where Fiona had come from or why she had never been seen in town before. "Clayton is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said as she helped Fiona select a soft blue cotton for her wedding dress. "His family has been in these parts for near 20 years. Everyone respected his father, and Clayton is cut from the same cloth. You are making a good choice, dear." "I know," Fiona said softly. "He saved my life in more ways than one." Mrs. Patterson patted her hand. "Love is often found in the most unexpected places. My husband and I will be honored to witness your marriage." The wedding was set for 3 weeks later, giving Fiona time to sew her dress and for Clayton to make arrangements. He wanted to do it right, he said, wanted to give her the wedding she deserved even if it would be small. In the evenings, while Fiona worked on her dress, Clayton worked on something in the barn that he would not let her see. When she asked about it, he just smiled mysteriously and told her it was a surprise. The night before the wedding, Fiona lay in her bed unable to sleep. Tomorrow her life would change irrevocably. She would become Mrs. Clayton Quincy, would pledge herself to this man who had shown her more kindness and love in a few months than her own family had in 19 years. It was everything she wanted, and yet she found herself thinking of her mother, wondering if she had heard that her abandoned daughter was getting married, wondering if she cared. She must have eventually dozed off because she woke to bright sunlight and the sound of Clayton moving around in the kitchen. Her wedding day. Fiona smiled and rose from bed, feeling a flutter of nerves and excitement in her stomach. Mrs. Patterson arrived mid-morning to help Fiona prepare. She had brought wildflowers that had just begun to bloom, and she wove them into Fiona's dark hair with practiced hands. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, stepping back to admire her work. "Clayton is going to be speechless." The dress fit perfectly, the blue fabric bringing out the color of Fiona's eyes. She had never owned anything so fine, and she touched the soft material with reverent fingers. The ceremony took place at the ranch, in front of the house where Fiona and Clayton had spent the winter falling in love. Preacher Patterson conducted the service with his wife as witness. Clayton wore a new shirt and had trimmed his beard. When Fiona emerged from the house and walked toward him, his expression did indeed become speechless. His eyes shone with unshed tears as he took her hands in his. The words of the ceremony washed over Fiona like a benediction. When Clayton slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, she believed him with every fiber of her being. When it was her turn to make the same promises, her voice was strong and clear. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Preacher Patterson said with a beaming smile. "Clayton, you may kiss your bride." Clayton cupped Fiona's face gently and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. After the Pattersons left, bearing a basket of food and the last of the winter preserves as thanks, Clayton took Fiona's hand. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her toward the barn. Inside, in a clean stall filled with fresh hay, was a beautiful rocking chair made of golden wood, carved and sanded smooth as glass. Fiona gasped, running her fingers over the intricate designs carved into the back. "You made this." "I did," Clayton said, looking pleased with her reaction. "I wanted you to have something that was made just for you. I know we do not have much, but I thought maybe someday you might sit in this chair and rock our children. I thought it could be something we pass down." Fiona threw her arms around his neck, overcome with emotion. "It is perfect." "You are perfect," Clayton laughed, holding her close. "I am far from perfect, Mrs. Quincy, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." They spent their wedding night in Clayton's room, which was now their room. He was gentle and patient, and Fiona felt safe and cherished in his arms. As they lay together afterward, her head on his chest listening to his heartbeat, she marveled at how completely her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been unwanted and unloved, cast out to die in the cold. Now she was a wife, a partner, belonging to a man who treasured her and to a place that felt like home. Spring bloomed around them in shades of green and gold. Fiona and Clayton planted the vegetable garden together, worked side by side mending fences and tending to the growing herd of cattle. Clayton taught her to ride properly, and soon Fiona was helping him move the cattle to different grazing areas. She took to the work naturally, her strength and determination serving her well in the demanding ranch life. The heat of summer brought long days of hard work, but also moments of joy. Swimming in the creek on hot afternoons, their clothes drying on the bank while they floated in the cool water. Picnics in the meadow, lying on a blanket and watching clouds drift by. Dancing in the barn to music only they could hear, Clayton humming while Fiona laughed. By autumn, Fiona knew she was pregnant. She told Clayton one evening in October as they sat by the fire. He stared at her in shock for a long moment, then let out a whoop of joy and spun her around the room, mindful of her condition. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy, Fiona, I am beyond happy. You have given me everything. A home that feels full again, love, and now a child. How did I get so lucky?" "I think I am the lucky one," Fiona said, kissing him. "You saved me, Clayton, in every possible way." "Then we saved each other," he said softly, "because I was lost too until I found you." The pregnancy progressed well through the winter, and by the time spring arrived again, Fiona was large and uncomfortable but glowing with health and happiness. Mrs. Patterson came to stay at the ranch as Fiona's time drew near, and on a warm May morning in 1885, Fiona gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel after Clayton's father. He had a shock of dark hair in his father's eyes, and when Clayton held him for the first time, Fiona saw tears stream down her husband's face. "Hello, Samuel," Clayton whispered to his son. "Welcome to the world. I promise I will be a good father to you. I promise I will never leave you, never abandon you. You are loved, little one, so very loved." Fiona watched them, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This was her family. This was her home. Not the one she had been born into, but the one she had chosen, and that had chosen her in return. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a strong, curious boy who followed his father everywhere. When he was 3, Fiona gave birth to twin daughters, Grace and Rose, who looked like miniature versions of their mother. The house rang with laughter and the chaos of young children, and Clayton proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful and endlessly loving. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Clayton's cattle business expanded, and Fiona's vegetable garden grew larger each year, producing enough that they could sell the surplus in Helena. They built an addition onto the house to accommodate their growing family, and Clayton hired a young ranch hand named James to help with the increasing workload. One winter evening, nearly 6 years after Clayton had found Fiona in the snow, they sat together by the fire while the children slept. Fiona was mending one of Samuel's shirts while Clayton carved a new toy horse for the twins. "You ever think about them?" Clayton asked quietly. "Your mother and stepfather?" Fiona considered the question. In the early years, she had thought of them often, the wound of their betrayal still raw and painful. But time had dulled that pain, replacing it with something closer to pity. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I wonder if they know I survived, I wonder if they care, but mostly I feel sorry for them. They threw away someone who would have loved them, who would have helped them, because they were too weak to see past their immediate problems. They lost a daughter, and for what? A few less mouths to feed. It is sad, really." "You are more generous than I would be," Clayton said. "I still get angry when I think about finding you that day. How close I came to never knowing you." Fiona set down her mending and moved to sit beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But you did find me. And everything that came after, all the good, might never have happened if things had been different. I cannot bring myself to regret the path that led me to you." Clayton kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Fiona Quincy, more than I ever thought it possible to love another person." "I love you too," she said. "You told me I belonged with you that first day, and you were right. I have never belonged anywhere the way I belong here with you." The firelight flickered, casting warm shadows on the walls of their home. Outside, snow fell gently over the ranch, but inside all was warmth and light and love. The children slept peacefully in their beds, safe and cherished. The cattle were secure in the barn. The cupboards were full. Everything was as it should be. As the years continued to pass, the Quincy family became a fixture in the Helena community. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Grace and Rose, inseparable as ever, showed talent for both ranch work and the domestic arts. In 1892, Fiona gave birth to another son, Michael, who completed their family. Clayton's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Fiona found laugh lines around her eyes, but they both agreed they had never been happier. They watched their children grow with pride and wonder, instilling in them the values of hard work, kindness, and the importance of family. The real family you choose and build, not necessarily the one you are born into. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Clayton surprised Fiona with a trip to Helena. They left the children with James, who had become like a member of the family, and spent 2 days at the hotel, dining in restaurants and walking the streets like a young courting couple. On the second evening, as they walked back to the hotel after supper, Fiona saw a face she recognized. Her mother stood outside a shop, older and more worn than Fiona remembered, but unmistakably her. For a moment, their eyes met across the street. Fiona felt Clayton tense beside her, his hand tightening on hers. "Is that—" "Yes," Fiona said quietly. Her mother took a step forward, her mouth opening as if to speak, but Fiona shook her head. There was nothing to say, no words that could bridge the gulf of 15 years and the betrayal that had nearly cost Fiona her life. Her mother stopped, her face crumpling, and Fiona felt a flicker of the old pain. But then Clayton's arm came around her shoulders, steady and sure, and Fiona remembered who she was now. She was not the abandoned girl freezing in the snow. She was Fiona Quincy, beloved wife and mother, partner in a successful ranch, surrounded by love and security. She had built a good life from the ashes of that terrible day, and she owed her mother nothing. Fiona turned away, leaning into Clayton's embrace as they continued toward the hotel. She did not look back. "Are you all right?" Clayton asked when they reached their room. "I am," Fiona said, and realized it was true. "I thought seeing her would hurt more, but it did not. She is just a stranger now, someone from another life." "You are amazing," Clayton said, pulling her close. "Strong and forgiving, and so much better than she deserved." "I am not forgiving," Fiona corrected. "I just do not care anymore. She does not get to have any piece of me, not my anger or my pain or my forgiveness. She gets nothing because she is nothing to me now." Clayton nodded, understanding. They spent the rest of the evening talking about their children, planning for the future, and celebrating the life they had built together. When they returned to the ranch the next day, the children rushed to greet them with enthusiastic hugs and endless questions about their trip. Samuel had kept everything running smoothly in their absence, and he beamed with pride when Clayton praised his work. The twins had picked wildflowers and put them in every room of the house. Michael had made a drawing of the whole family, stick figures holding hands in front of a lopsided house, and presented it to Fiona with great ceremony. As Fiona tucked the children into bed that night, listening to their prayers and kissing their foreheads, she marveled again at the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From abandonment to belonging, from isolation to family, from death's door to abundant life. When she returned to the main room, she found Clayton sitting in the rocking chair he had made her all those years ago. He held out his hand and she took it, settling onto his lap despite the fact that they were far too old for such things. The chair creaked but held, just as their love had held through all the challenges and joys of 15 years together. "I was just thinking," Clayton said, his chin resting on top of her head, "about that day. The day I found you. What about it? I was not supposed to be out that way. I had planned to check the southern fence line, but something made me change my mind at the last minute. A feeling, an instinct. If I had stuck to my original plan, I would never have found you." Fiona had never heard this detail before. She twisted to look at her husband's face. "You never told me that." "I never wanted to think too hard about it," Clayton admitted. "About how close we came to never meeting. But now, with 15 years behind us and hopefully many more ahead, I can acknowledge it. Something bigger than us was at work that day. Fate, God, whatever you want to call it. We were meant to find each other, Fiona, meant to build this life." "I believe that," Fiona said softly. "I have to believe it because the alternative is too terrible to consider." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire burning low, the house quiet around them. Outside, the Montana night was vast and star-filled, the land peaceful under the watchful moon. The ranch that Clayton's father had built and that Clayton and Fiona had nurtured together was thriving. Their children were healthy and happy. Their love was deep and true. In the years that followed, there were challenges, as there always are in life. Harsh winters and dry summers, cattle that got sick, fences that needed constant mending. Samuel eventually married a smart young woman from town named Clara, and they built a house on the north part of the ranch land, preparing to take over the operation when Clayton was ready to step back. The twins showed no interest in settling down, declaring they wanted to be school teachers and moving to Helena for their training. Michael, as he grew, showed an aptitude for working with horses that surpassed even his father's skills. Through it all, Clayton and Fiona remained each other's anchor and support. They worked together, laughed together, occasionally argued but always made up. They grew old together in the way of people who are truly partnered, finishing each other's sentences and communicating with glances across crowded rooms. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party that half of Helena attended. Friends and neighbors filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard, sharing food and stories and raising glasses to the couple who had become pillars of the community. Samuel made a speech about his parents' example of love and dedication. Grace and Rose sang a song they had learned at teaching college. Michael presented them with a matched pair of young horses he had trained himself. Late in the evening, when the guests had finally departed and the children were cleaning up, Clayton and Fiona slipped away to their favorite spot, the rise overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Clayton's arm was around Fiona's shoulders, and her head rested against his chest, their bodies fitting together as perfectly as they had 25 years before. "Thank you," Clayton said quietly. "For what?" "For staying with me that first night. For choosing to build a life here. For giving me children and love and purpose. For being you." Fiona smiled, turning to kiss his weathered cheek. "You gave me all those things too, and you gave me something even more important, something I had lost and never thought I would find again." "What is that?" "You gave me a place to belong. A home, not just in the physical sense, but in every way that matters. You told me I belonged with you, and you have spent 25 years proving it every single day." Clayton's eyes were wet with tears as he pulled her closer. "You do belong with me. Always have, always will. In this life and whatever comes after." They stood together as darkness fell, watching the first stars appear in the vast Montana sky. The ranch was quiet now, the day's work done, the animals settled for the night. In the house below, their children moved about, their voices carrying on the evening breeze. Samuel's baby, their first grandchild, began to cry and was quickly soothed. Smoke rose from the chimney, carrying with it the scent of home. Everything that had begun on that terrible, frigid day when Fiona had been abandoned to die had led to this moment, this life, this love. She had been broken and cast aside, but Clayton had found her and put her back together. More than that, he had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. He had given her not just shelter from the storm, but a reason to keep living. And in return, Fiona had given him the family and love he had lost, a partner to share the burden and the joy, someone to build a legacy with. They had saved each other, two broken people made whole by the simple decision to care, to try, to love. As they walked back to the house together, hand in hand as they had for 25 years, Fiona thought about the girl she had been, frozen and dying in the snow. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, that the worst day of her life would become the best because it would lead her to Clayton, that the family who abandoned her would be replaced by one she chose and built, that she would be happy, truly happy, in ways she had never imagined possible. But perhaps it was better not to know. Perhaps the surprise of it, the miraculous nature of her salvation and transformation, was part of what made it so sweet. Clayton opened the door to their home and warmth and light spilled out. Their children's faces turned toward them with smiles. Samuel's wife, Clara, held out the baby for them to admire. The table was set for a late supper, and the fire was burning bright. "Come on in, you two," Samuel called. "Food is getting cold." Clayton looked at Fiona, his eyes full of love and contentment. "Ready, always," she said, and they stepped inside together, closing the door on the night and embracing the blessed ordinary moments of their extraordinary life. The years continued to roll by like the seasons, predictable in their passing but always bringing something new. Fiona's hair turned silver, and Clayton's back began to ache on cold mornings, but they faced these changes together with grace and humor. They became grandparents several times over as their children married and started families of their own. Samuel and Clara had 4 children who loved the ranch as much as their father and grandfather did. Grace married a banker from Helena and brought her husband out to the ranch every Sunday for dinner. Rose found love with a fellow teacher, and though they lived in town, they were frequent visitors. Michael, true to his nature with horses, earned a reputation as the best horse trainer in the territory, and had young people coming from miles around to learn from him. Clayton taught all his grandchildren to ride, to care for animals, to respect the land. Fiona taught them to cook, to sew, to read, and most importantly, to be kind. The ranch house was never quiet anymore, always filled with the sounds of children playing, adults talking, life happening in all its messy, beautiful glory. One evening, when Fiona was 62 and Clayton 68, they sat together on the porch watching yet another Montana sunset. Their bodies were tired from a long day helping with the spring planting, but their hearts were full. "Did you ever imagine this?" Fiona asked, gesturing to the bustling ranch below them where their children and grandchildren were finishing up the day's work. All of this coming from that terrible day. Clayton was quiet for a moment, thinking. "No," he finally said. "I did not dare imagine something this good. I thought I would live out my life alone, working this ranch until I died and passing it on to some distant cousin. I never dreamed I would find love again, let alone a love like ours." "Again?" Fiona asked, curious. "You were in love before. I thought I was when I was young. There was a girl before the war, before we moved west. But it was nothing like this. What you and I have, it is beyond anything I could have hoped for." Fiona reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "I never knew love at all before you. What I thought was love in my family was really just obligation and tolerance. You showed me what it really means to be loved. And you showed me what it means to have a true partner," Clayton said. "Someone who works beside you, not behind you or for you, but truly with you. We built all this together, Fiona. Every fence post, every cow, every child. Together." Their youngest grandchild, Samuel's daughter Emily, came running up to the porch, her pigtails flying behind her. "Grandma, Grandpa, come see. The new calf is walking." Fiona and Clayton smiled at each other and stood, their joints protesting but their spirits willing. Hand in hand, they followed Emily to the barn, where sure enough, a wobbly new calf was taking its first steps under its mother's watchful eye. The whole family gathered to watch. Multiple generations crowded into the barn, sharing in the simple miracle of new life. Clayton's arm was around Fiona's waist, and she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. This was everything, she thought. This moment, this family, this love. It was everything she had lost and thought she would never have, returned to her 100-fold. The abandoned, unwanted girl had become the matriarch of a thriving family. The woman left to die in the snow had built a life so full of warmth and love that it sometimes overwhelmed her with its abundance. As the family slowly dispersed back to their evening routines, Clayton and Fiona remained in the barn a while longer. The calf had settled down next to its mother, both resting in the clean straw. The evening light slanted through the barn windows, turning everything golden. "I need to tell you something," Clayton said, his voice serious in a way that made Fiona turn to look at him with concern. "What is it?" "I have been thinking about my father lately, about what he told me before he died. He said that a man's legacy is not measured in acres or cattle, but in the lives he touches and the love he leaves behind." Clayton paused, his throat working with emotion. "I think I understand now what he meant. This ranch, everything we have built, it is not really about the land or the livestock. It is about family, about creating a place where love can grow and flourish. And Fiona, you gave me that. You are the reason all of this exists." Fiona shook her head. "We gave it to each other, Clayton. Neither of us could have done this alone." "Maybe so," he conceded. "But I know that the day I found you in the snow was the most important day of my life, not because I saved you, but because you saved me right back." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that had kissed thousands of times before and would hopefully kiss thousands of times more. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. As they walked back to the house together, they passed the rocking chair that Clayton had made so many years ago. It sat on the porch now, where Fiona often sat with whichever grandchild needed comforting or just wanted to hear a story. The wood was worn smooth from years of use, but it was as sturdy as the day Clayton had made it. "That chair has held a lot of love over the years," Fiona observed. "It was made with love," Clayton replied, "like everything else in our life together." They entered the house to find the long table set for supper, surrounded by children and grandchildren. Grace was mashing potatoes while Rose sliced bread. Michael was entertaining the youngest grandchildren with silly faces. Samuel and Clara were setting out plates and cups. It was chaos and noise and everything good about family. Clayton pulled out Fiona's chair for her, as he had done every night for nearly 30 years, and took his seat beside her. They held hands while Samuel said grace, thanking God for the food, the family, and the blessings that continued to multiply. As the meal progressed, filled with laughter and conversation, and the occasional minor squabble between grandchildren, Fiona looked around the table at all the faces she loved. Each one of them existed because of that day in the snow, because Clayton had chosen kindness over indifference, because he had seen a frozen girl and decided she was worth saving, and because she had chosen in that moment and every moment since to trust him, to stay with him, to build a life with him. It would have been easy to leave once she recovered, to thank him and move on, too afraid of being hurt again to risk her heart. But she had stayed, and that decision had made all the difference. After supper, when the dishes were washed and the children had been put to bed and the grandchildren had gone home with their parents, Clayton and Fiona found themselves alone again in their bedroom. It was the same room where they had spent their wedding night, though it had been updated and changed over the years. But the basics remained the same, the wide bed and the window looking out over the ranch. Fiona brushed out her long silver hair while Clayton changed into his nightshirt. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of 3 decades of marriage, each knowing where the other would be, what they would need. When they were both ready for bed, Clayton pulled Fiona close, her back to his chest, his arms around her waist. This was how they slept now, pressed together for warmth and comfort and the simple reassurance of the other's presence. "I love you," Clayton murmured into her hair. "I love you too," Fiona replied. "Always and forever." "Always and forever," Clayton agreed. They drifted off to sleep together as they had for so many years, secure in each other's love and in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and true. The ranch was quiet around them, the animals settled, the family safe and happy. The years that followed brought the natural cycle of life and death. Clayton's strength began to fade as he moved into his 70s, and Fiona was not far behind. But they faced these changes together, never complaining, always grateful for another day, another sunrise, another moment in each other's company. Samuel took over most of the day-to-day ranch operations, with Michael handling the horses and the grandchildren pitching in wherever they were needed. Clayton and Fiona moved into the role of advisors and beloved elders, still involved but no longer bearing the weight of responsibility. They spent their days doing simpler tasks, tending Fiona's flower garden, sitting on the porch watching the world go by, playing with great-grandchildren who were starting to arrive. They took walks around the ranch at sunset, moving slower now but still hand in hand, still pointing out things to each other, still finding joy in the land they loved. One spring morning, 42 years after Clayton had found Fiona in the snow, they woke to a beautiful day full of sunshine and birdsong. Fiona felt unusually tired, but she said nothing, not wanting to worry Clayton. They had breakfast with Samuel's family, admired the new foal in the barn, and spent the afternoon in the garden. As evening approached, they took their customary walk to the rise overlooking the ranch. The sunset was spectacular, all gold and crimson and violet. They stood together, Clayton's arm around Fiona's shoulders, her head on his chest, watching the light change and fade. "It is beautiful," Fiona said softly. "Just beautiful." "Yes," Clayton agreed. "Like you, still beautiful after all these years." Fiona laughed, a sound like music to Clayton's ears. "You are biased." "Absolutely," he confirmed without shame. They stood in comfortable silence until the stars began to appear. Fiona felt a strange sense of peace wash over her, a feeling of completion. "Clayton," she said, "I want you to know something." "What is that?" "If I could go back and change that day, change what my family did to me, I would not. Because it brought me to you and you brought me to this life. Everything I have, everything I am, it all started the day you told me I belonged with you. Thank you for that. Thank you for 42 years of belonging." Clayton's arms tightened around her and she felt him trembling. "Fiona, you are talking like you are saying goodbye." "I am just feeling sentimental," she assured him, though something deep inside her whispered that it was more than that. "I love you, Clayton Quincy. I have loved you since I beat you at chess all those years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Clayton said, his voice breaking. "More than words can say." They stayed on the rise until full dark, then walked slowly back to the house. Fiona felt each step, memorizing the feel of the earth beneath her feet, the sound of the night birds, the warmth of Clayton's hand in hers. That night, they lay in their bed as they had for 42 years, wrapped in each other's arms. Fiona felt herself drifting, Clayton's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, and she smiled. This was enough, she thought. More than enough. A lifetime of love, a family that stretched out like branches of a tree, a legacy of kindness and hard work and devotion. She had been abandoned, cast out, left for dead. But she had been found, cherished, and given a life beyond her wildest dreams. As she slipped into sleep, her last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude for the snow that had forced Clayton to find her. Gratitude for his kind heart and strong arms. Gratitude for every day, every moment, every kiss and laugh and tear they had shared. Fiona Quincy passed peacefully in her sleep that night, cradled in the arms of the man who had loved her completely for more than 4 decades. Clayton woke at dawn to find her still and cold beside him, and his cry of anguish brought the family running. They buried her on the rise overlooking the ranch, in a spot where she had loved to stand and watch the sunsets. The whole community came to pay their respects, sharing stories of her kindness, her strength, her love. Clayton stood beside the grave, supported by his children, and spoke through his tears about the day he had found her and how she had transformed his life. The months that followed were difficult for Clayton. He had never been without Fiona since that snowy day in 1883, and her absence was a physical ache. But the family rallied around him, ensuring he was never alone, filling his days with the great-grandchildren he adored and the work that still needed doing. He spent hours at her grave, talking to her as if she could hear. He told her about the ranch, about the children, about how much he missed her. And sometimes, in the quiet of evening, he swore he could feel her presence, sense her love surrounding him still. Clayton lived another year without his Fiona, and while he functioned and even smiled, part of him was always waiting to be reunited with her. When he finally passed, peacefully in his chair on the porch, the family buried him beside Fiona on the rise. The ranch passed to Samuel and his children, as it would pass to their children after them. The story of Clayton and Fiona became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The rocking chair Clayton had made stayed on the porch, used by mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers to soothe crying babies and share stories. The house was expanded and updated, but the original rooms remained, a testament to the foundation upon which everything was built. And on the rise, two headstones stood side by side, bearing simple inscriptions. Clayton Quincy, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. Fiona Quincy, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. But if you looked closely, carved small at the base of Fiona's stone was a line that Clayton had requested before he died. She belonged with me. It was a simple truth that had started a lifetime of love, grown a family, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. From abandonment to belonging, from death to life, from loneliness to love, their story remained a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the miracle that could grow from a single choice to see the worth in another person. The ranch still stood, prosperous and thriving, a monument to everything Clayton and Fiona had built together. And somewhere in the Montana wind that blew across the land, in the rustle of the grass and the call of the birds, their love endured, eternal and unchanging. A reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the very best, if we are brave enough to trust and open enough to love.